Okay, we're all set up, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Glad to be back here. Today we'll cover chapter 1, Canto 1, chapter 13, the Thrashed quits home. Very wonderful chapter. So a short, very short summary of the last chapter and what's happening up to this point is that in the last chapter we heard, as you may recall, Parikshit Maharaj was born after being almost killed by the Brahmastra thrown by Ashwatthama. Krishna had entered Uttara's womb and he protected the embryo. We also heard the wonderful qualities of this future child, the last remaining to the Pandavas family, and his predictions, his future predictions as a very qualified king. Now in the next three chapters, starting with this chapter 13, 14, and 15, we will hear how everyone is beginning to wind up his Leela. Now, Krishna's main purpose was to remove the burden of the earth, which he did by the war. And then Yudhishthira rules the world, and Krishna plans to leave his earthly pastimes in the next chapter, starting chapter 14. And by the time of, however, by the time that this chapter, the events in this chapter is happening, which is called Dhritarashtra quits home, this has already occurred. In other words, Krishna has already disappeared because a great sage, Vidura, enters Hastinapur. Now, this chapter begins with Vidura coming back and the past history of Vidura, which is explained in the purport of the first verse. So I'll read the Sanskrit and the translation, and then we will go into explanation. Sutta vacha vidurastitra yatrayam metriyad atmanogatim gyatvagat dastinapuram taya yapta vivesita. Sri Sutta Goswami said, while traveling on a pilgrimage, Vidura received knowledge of the destination of the self from the great sage Maitreya and then returned to Hastinapur. He became as well versed in the subject as he desired. Now, this sage Vidura, he has two identities, Prabhupada explains. Now, his prime identity, his real identity is Yamaraj. And there's a story of how he became Vidura. Now, there was one Muni called Manduka Muni. One day, what happened is some thieves went into his ashram to hide out from some policemen who were chasing them. They were thieves, and they were followed by these policemen. And policemen, of course, found out, and they came. And when they saw the thieves hiding there, they captured them, but they also captured this Muni, and took him to the king, to the court for judgment. Now, all these thieves were sentenced to, death, but they also sentenced this Muni as well. But the sentence was very, very strong. They sentenced him to death by being pierced by a lance. Now, you can imagine the mood of a person who has done a horrendous action and is sentenced. Now, the other hand, if you imagine someone who is just simply innocent, who finds out that he's been sentenced to a crime that he has not done, just imagine his feelings. They released him ultimately, understanding that he was a great king. The king actually intervened and pardoned him, and actually he came to apologize to him. However, the Muni was very angry, and he went to Yamaraj and asked him, "Why have you done this to me? How come you did this to me? I have not done anything." And Yamaraj, he called his name in the database and he checked his records. And although he was a great sage, as a child, he said he had taken an ant and pierced him through with a straw. Yamaraj told him what he had done. The Muni was actually very angry. He said, "I was a little child. I did not know what I was doing. Such a heavy punishment for something so small. You have the intelligence of a Shudra. Therefore, I curse you. You become a Shudra." So, this is a very important story for us, for the children to learn. Some very important point is how if you do something to somebody, even though we do it unknowingly, we will still suffer reaction. So everybody has to be careful with what we do. Even, and try not to make these, offenses. Right? Because so what to do now? The question is what to do, because there's so many things we are doing in life, in our day-to-day life, which is not does not completely avoid these, giving pain to others. For example, just by breathing, walking, as we're walking in the street, we may step on an ant. As we cook, so many things, right? So what do we do? So if you do, Prabhupada explains how if you do everything for Krishna, then this way the person is protected, the devotee is protected. Just like if a government officer, he does something which is not really liked by the people, but yet because he's working for the government, he's protected by the government. And of course, Prabhupada gives the example of also a soldier. If he is on duty and he kills, well, he's not punished for his killing. However, if he comes back home and he starts shooting, then of course he will be punished. So anyway, Manduka Mungiri got very angry and he cursed Yamaraj to become a Shudra. And this Shudra incarnation of Yamaraj is Vidura, who in one sense a Shudra, but in the real sense, he's a very holy personality called Yamaraj. Of course, as Vidura, he's similarly very, very holy. Right? And he happens to be born in the royal palace of Hastinapur and is the half-brother of Dhritarashtra and Pandu. So, well, there's more of Vidura's story in the third canto, right in the beginning. There's more detailed description of how when he became Vidura, he was forced to leave the palace. That's why he's coming back. Now, why did he in the first place leave this palace? Now, this is, so what happened is, one time he was with Dhritarashtra. As you know, he really provided help to his blind brother, and he would give him advice. So one day what happened is Dhritarashtra was asking him what he should do in terms of the Pandavas. How should they be dealt? And Vidura replied that give back the kingdom to the Pandavas right away, he said, because he was always giving him this better sense. However, what Dhritarashtra was so attached to his eldest son Duryodhana that all that advice, even though in his heart he knew they were proper advice, he could not execute it. So Vidura said, you give back the kingdom. You have stolen them. Don't be influenced by your son Duryodhana. He's offense personified. He's such an envious person that he's envious of Krishna. He tried to trick Krishna, who came to make peace. So Duryodhana, what happened is he tied up Krishna, and he tied him up. And you may recall the story how when Krishna, of course, manifested his universal form, Duryodhana tried to make amends and invited Krishna for a big feast, but Krishna refused, and instead he went to Vidura's house. And this very sweet, famous story of how his wife, fascinated with this beautiful form of Krishna, she was feeding him peels instead of bananas. Right? So when Duryodhana, of course, when he heard Vidura's words to Dhritarashtra, he was so angry and besides himself, and he immediately started insulting him, and he called him very bad words. He said, you're a son of a kept mistress, you're taking maintenance from us, yet you're behind our back, you're stabbing us. And like this, he ordered that he be taken out of the palace immediately with nothing but his breath. Now, if somebody is given that order, then there's nothing much he's got left, right? At that time, Vidura, when he heard this, he was quite shocked, actually. After all he was doing is giving his opinion, but he understood that this is the higher plan of the Lord, and he left, and he went on pilgrimage for 20 years. He traveled all over the land. He himself was, he kept himself incognito, right? He appeared poor, he begged from place to place. And he had, he was not in the royal palace anymore. He was practically living like a mendicant. And then, so this is Vidura's story. And again, very big lessons we learn in this story. Of course, the story goes on is that when he was traveling on his pilgrimage, he met, at Prabha he came to a place where Krishna had left the planet. And then from there, he went on to Delhi near Gurgaon, and he met Uddhava. And he asked him to tell him what Krishna had told him, and that's all recounted in Canto 11, Uddhava Gita. And of course, Uddhava, being very conscious of the fact that Vidura was a lot senior to him, he directed him to Maitreya Muni, who I think at that time was 125 years old, right, in Haridwar. And he told him to hear from him. And Maitreya Muni happened to be was also hearing when Krishna was instructing Uddhava. So Maitreya Muni, so that takes up practically the entire third and fourth canto, where Vidura is asking questions from Maitreya Muni, and there's many parts of the Bhagavatam that's covered. As you know, third canto covers the creation as well as Kapila Muni's instructions to his mother, and Canto 4 would be the dynasty of Uttanapad, where the story of Dhruva Maharaj comes. So in this way, Vidura spent many years first of all, wandering on a pilgrimage and then hearing from Maitreya Muni. So you can imagine the status of this great soul, when he comes back. So when Vidura comes back, he doesn't come back as the Pandavas, uncle, but he comes back as a great holy man, as a great holy man. And so at that point, when he was close to Delhi, he decided to go back to Hastinapur and to save his blind brother Thrashed, whom he was very fond of. And so this is where the story begins, this chapter begins. So in our next slide, we will hear about how the citizens of Dwarka receive Vidura with love and veneration. This is many times we've been hearing this aspect, how the citizens have been receiving Krishna, and now the citizens of Dwarka are receiving Vidura. So in text 5, now all these people are the inhabitants of Hastinapur. So remember, it was Yudhishthira, Thrashed, Draupadi, Gandhari, Kunti, Subhadra, Sanjaya, all these people. And when they saw him, it felt like their life had come back again, because Vidura was very much loved here. He was actually, he had his leanings towards the Pandavas, who he knew were great souls and they were very innocent. Now, a few verses. With great delight, they all approached him as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. Due to anxieties and long separation, they all cried out of affection. King Yudhishthira then arranged to offer sitting accommodations and a reception. After Vidura ate sumptuously and took sufficient rest, he was comfortably seated. Then the king began to speak to him, and all who were present there listened. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us, along with our mother, from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson. While traveling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified, because you carry the personality of God within your heart. You turn all places into pilgrimage." So then he asks about his travels, and then text 13, which is the last of this section. Compassionate Mahatma Vidura could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. Therefore, he did not disclose the unpalatable and unbearable incident, because calamities of their own accord come of their own accord. And what were these calamities that he didn't speak about? Is the demise of the Yadu dynasty, as well as the disappearance of Lord Krishna, because that's going to be known to them very soon. After one chapter, there will be the retirement of the Pandavas after Krishna disappears. So Prabhupada writes some very interesting things about this, about Vidura here, that how Vidura came back not to get himself resettled at the palace, but he came to enlighten his brother. He had only this one purpose, and he was going to go away again because he had adopted the life of mendicant. And then, then another point that he raises is that how the residents of Hastinapur are now treating him as a holy person, and how that was an important point to understand. How these saintly souls are carrying the places of pilgrimage with them, are really dharma. And so our next slide will discuss this very nice side point for the children. Saintly souls verily are places of pilgrimage. That's the next slide. Then in this, Prabhupada explains in the purport how just like there's electricity in the walls, but still it takes an outlet to evoke that potency of that electricity. So the same special facility to invoke Krishna's presence is the sadhu or devotee. This means, therefore, wherever he is, it becomes a holy place of pilgrimage. So if anyone visits a holy place, he must search out the pure devotee, Prabhupada is writing, residing in such holy places. Take lessons from them, try to apply such instructions in practical life, and then gradually prepare oneself for the ultimate salvation, going back to Godhead. To go to some holy place of pilgrimage does not mean only to take a bath in the Ganges or Yamuna or to visit the temples situated in those holy places. One should also find representatives of Vidura who have no desire in life save and except to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada explains how this verse is very important for people to understand, because a holy person is very special because he cuts on the knot of our material attachment. So in this way, Vidura, when he was giving advice, when he's going to cut the knot of attachment for the Thrashed, he was helping, giving that same benefit to others who had gathered around him. So in our next slide, we'll talk about how Vidura cuts the Thrashed's illusion. And really, this is the crux, this is the real essence of this chapter, how he does that. By explaining how time is unstoppable. Now, in text 17, Prabhupada explains how, I will read the translation, insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. And the 18th verse, Mahatma Vidura knew this, and therefore he addressed the Thrashed. My dear king, please get out of here immediately. Do not delay. Just see how fear has overtaken you. So Prabhupada explains how insurmountable time, it sneaks upon everyone imperceptibly. It is compared to a snake. Why? Because a snake comes up very quietly and suddenly bites. Snake, and this snake comes closer by closer every day. We don't notice it coming, but coming closer. But instead, we try to become comfortable. Instead of being aware how the snake of time is coming closer and closer, we try to become comfortable, right? So sometimes we work so hard, but yet especially in old age, it happens. We work so hard and we think, oh, now finally I should reap the results of all my hard work. I should make myself comfortable. But the snake of time surprises us. Just like Prabhupada explains how the things of family life, they completely overtake our mind. And so this Maharaj Yudhishthira understood this, and he spoke to Yudhishthira in the presence of everyone. He didn't say, oh, you poor fellow, you've lost 100 sons, and now I'm glad you're being taken care of by Yudhishthira. And no, he said, no, O king, get out of here immediately. Do not delay. Just see how fear has overtaken you. So he gets to the heart of the matter, right? Everyone is actually afraid of death. So in this way, we surround ourselves with family and friends. We don't want to think about it. But Vidura here is saying, no, think about it, get out here now. So this is what cutting words of a sadhu, and this is why sadhu carries with him these um, the spiritual world and a message of going back to Godhead. So, so in this way, in many verses now, he's going to wake Dhritarashtra up, and Dhritarashtra is going to wake up. That's because of the pure words of a sadhu. Now, in text 19 and 20, I'll read the translation and then explain briefly. This frightful situation, Vidura speaking, this frightful situation cannot be remedied by any person in this material world. My Lord, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as eternal time, Kala, that has approached us all. Whoever is under the influence of Supreme Kala, eternal time, must surrender his most dear life. And what to speak of other things, such wealth, honor, children, land, and home. So, so here Prabhupada is saying that it is time which is Krishna, and therefore it is unstoppable. And so time affects everyone, regardless of what body one has. Everyone must surrender his life, his wealth, honor, family. Now, Dhritarashtra was blind from birth. He was thinking, if I leave, who will take care of me? This is the fear of everyone, to be unloved, uncared for, because it's a condition of everyone. Everyone is thinking we're going to lose everything. Right? Now, in text 21, 22, and 23, he talks about how he reminds him of what's happened in the war. He tells him that your father, well-wishers, sons, they have all passed away. Your body is taken by invalidity. Your memory is shortened. Your intelligence is disturbed. Your tooth are loose. Your liver is defective. And you're coughing up mucus. And now this is actually a real friend, right? Who tells as it is without trying to hide it, right? But the real slap comes when he says, Vidura tells him that you're actually a household dog. Why? Because a dog sits near the table of his master, and then when the master has finished eating, he throws a few scraps for a king. Right? And why is he comparing him like that? Because he is the one who tried to kill the Pandavas for years and years, and Bhima has killed, in return, has killed each of his sons. Right? In the war, he ripped out the hearts of everyone, and all of these 100 sons, and drank the blood like he had promised. Why does he do it? Because that's the nature of a Kshatriya. He likes justice, right? Now, it is said that Dhritarashtra, a side story, interesting story, where that after the war, when the Pandavas went before Dhritarashtra, all of them went to make amends, to grieve with him because of his losing 100 sons. Actually, Krishna stopped Bhima and said, "You don't go." And instead, you may have seen it in the movie or something, they put the steel body of Bhima, and Dhritarashtra actually crushed that steel body because he was so angry with Bhima. Right? So Vidura, why is he telling all this? Because he wanted to make him see that he was eating from the person who had killed all of his sons. Right? He's saying that your compassion to him has no meaning, has no meaning actually. And then, of course, there's more verses like that where he points out how so many times Dhritarashtra had tried to kill the Pandavas. And then how he had insulted Draupadi. And he said, you are sitting here comfortably to try to prevent death. But do you know that your miserly body will deteriorate very soon, just like one leaves an old garment? When a garment becomes old, you can very easily tear it up, right? So in the same way, when the body becomes old, it becomes finished. It becomes very sick. So in this way, very, very cutting verses. And in the last few verses of his preaching, he's talking about how Kali was approaching. And an intelligent person is one who prepares for that. and he leaves even before this yuga comes. Because why? Because in this yuga, people lose all their good qualities, everything. And so he plans to leave immediately. So Vidura, after Dhritarashtra, after hearing the words of Vidura, he plans to leave immediately. So in our next slide, we will discuss how this Thrashed leaves and Gandhari follows. Thus Maharaj Dhritarashtra, the scion of the family of Ajamida, firmly convinced by introspective knowledge, broke at once the strong network of familial affection by his resolute determination. Thus he immediately left home to set on the path of liberation as directed by his younger brother Vidura. The gentle and chaste Gandhari, who was a daughter of King Subala of Kandahar or Gandhara, followed her husband, seeing that he was going to the Himalaya mountains, which are the delight of those who have accepted the staff of the renounced order, like fighters who have accepted a good lashing from the enemy. So the words of Vidura has shaken up Dhritarashtra, right? That's what Sutta Goswami is saying. Maitreya Muni is telling, is how it has really shaken him up. And I'm going to read a little bit of the purport about Gandhari, how Prabhupada explains the situation with Gandhari. Prabhupada writes in the purport about Gandhari. Now, this is, I think, purport of 29, I'm not quite sure. Saubalini or Gandhari, daughter of King Subala and wife of King Dhritarashtra, was ideal as a wife devoted to her husband. The Vedic civilization specially prepares chaste and devoted wives, of whom Gandhari is one amongst many mentioned in history. Lakshmiji, Sita Devi, was also a daughter of a great king, but she followed her husband, Lord Ramachandra, into the forest. Similarly, as a woman, Gandhari could have remained at home or at her father's house, but as a chaste and gentle lady, she followed her husband without consideration. Instructions for a renounced order of life were imparted to Dhritarashtra by Vidura, and Gandhari was by the side of her husband. But he did not ask her to follow him because he was at that moment fully determined, like a great warrior who faces all kinds of dangers in the battlefield. He was no longer attracted to his so-called wife and relatives, and he decided to start alone. But as a chaste lady, Gandhari decided to follow her husband to the last moment. Okay. Then, we'll go into our next slide, Yudhishthir and Sanjaya lament. So when Vidura wakes up the next morning, now Dhritarashtra immediately leaves. And the next morning, nobody knew. He went quietly, right? Next morning, Yudhishthir and all the family members woke up. Now, Yudhishthir's agenda in the morning was every day was to give charity, and then he would go and pay respects to the elders. So he was walking towards Dhritarashtra's quarters, and he noticed that he was not there. And Gandhari as well, which is very strange because they were blind and quite old. And so he's very, very shocked, and he's lamenting. And this, Prabhupada writes, how this shows the great quality of a pure devotee. And he explains how this is the special quality of Yudhishthira. And we see this again and again, his heart, how clean it was, how pure it was, and how compassionate it was. Yeah. Because instead of thinking that how Dhritarashtra had completely ruined the whole dynasty with his son, Duryodhan, instead he's blaming himself, just like he was blaming earlier all the people killed, himself for all the people killed in the battle, and Bhishma had to counsel him, right? In the same way here, he's feeling himself responsible for Dhritarashtra's sorry state, his grief and Gandhari's grief, and he's lamenting and feeling himself responsible. Now, Sanjaya was the personal assistant of Dhritarashtra, very, very faithful servant. He was with him during the war, and actually, by his potency, by his boon, he was able to show Dhritarashtra, even though he was blind, what was happening in the battlefield. And he's feeling like, cheated. He's feeling like His master didn't tell him before he left, and so he's feeling very cheated. Of course, nobody knew the real situation, what had actually happened, how the Thrashed, even though he had lost everything, he left not out of frustration, but by the knowledge that was awakened in his heart by this great sage Vidura. So the Thrashed, he very determined, in a very determined way, he rid himself of the contamination of the body, and he transcended comfort and misery from his body. He left home, he gave up the shackles of material independence and left towards the north, towards the Himalayas. And of course, both of them didn't know, and they were worrying who would feed him, what if somebody attacks him, what if a tiger kills him, what if somebody robs him, he has nothing to eat. And Prabhupada writes a very interesting point, how there's two aspects, how a person who is depending upon somebody else and a person who's being depended upon. Now, he explains how the latter's anxiety is different and is more intense, which means the person who's being protected upon, his anxiety and his attachment is actually greater than the person who's depending upon. And that can be seen very wonderfully in the example of the parent and child. The child is dependent on the parent, but the parent's anxiety is greater because he's being dependent upon, and his attachment is very difficult to give up. Right? And so Yudhishthira Maharaj was feeling like that, right? Because he felt responsible. He felt like the parent, that he needed to protect the Thrashtas. Right? So that's an interesting point for us to learn from this. How ultimately we have to also give up that kind of attachment, right? Now, in our next slide, we will talk about how the great souls cheat for a higher purpose. Very sweet, interesting point, which I thought will be very interesting for the children, because we can bring some examples here. How there were other people in Vedic history, how they also went quietly. Cheating others means without telling others. And examples we have that I've given here, Sanatan Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Prabhupada as well. Now, the question is, why did Sanjaya, the point that Prabhupada is raising is mainly that the Thrashta, for him to actually cut off this attachment, he had to leave in this way, because he was really not on the platform of pure devotion. So for him he was not leaving because of, love of Krishna. He was leaving to give up attachment to his body and to the people around him, right? So this way he becomes liberated, but not really goes back to the spiritual world. And the examples of Sanatan Goswami, who also cheated the keeper of the prison when he decided to go and join Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then we hear the story of Raghunath Das Goswami, how he cheated his parents and he ran away from home, right? He cheated a priest, I think, and he ran away from home. And then Prabhupada, of course, also he left quietly, give up his family. Now, in the next slide, we will talk about how Narada instructs. Why is he instructing here? Because Yudhishthira is lamenting, right? And Narada miraculously appears there. Just like when last time Yudhishthira was lamenting, Krishna sent him to Bhishma, and Bhishma instructs him and puts him back to, to going back to his duties. In the same way, Narada Muni here instructs Yudhishthira Maharaj, and of course all the others. Okay? So here Prabhupada explains some puppet. I'll read a little bit of that puppet. How every living being, whether a man or an animal or a bird, thinks that he's free by himself. This is what Narada Muni is saying. But actually, no one is free from the severe laws of God. So Narada Muni is explaining how the laws of God are even more important than the laws of the state. The man-made laws, you can kind of, bypass it. once in a while, right? And evade the law people. Like in taxes, people get away with things. But it's very difficult to evade the Supreme Lord's laws. Right? Even a slight change from the course of God-made law can bring about a massive danger to be faced by the lawbreaker. And such laws are generally known as the codes of religion. But actually, the codes of law are one and the same in every religion, and one must follow them. Narad Muni says, "O king, in all circumstances, whether you consider the soul to be an eternal principle, or the mature body to be perishable, or everything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth, or everything to be an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit, feelings of separation are due only to illusory affection and nothing more." This is a very interesting point that he says. And this is for all the impersonalists out there, and those who are atheists, and for those who are devotees. So what he's saying is that for those, just like Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, that if you think that the body is the self, Krishna says this point to Arjuna to get rid of his lamentation that, I don't want to fight. My family members, will be killed. What is the use of, getting the kingdom at that cost of them, who are the very reasons whom he wants to enjoy the kingdom with, right? So in this, to the answer to that, Krishna explains that if you think that the body is the self, then and there's no soul, then there's no reason for lamentation. Because then the body is a bunch of chemicals, so why are you lamenting? And if you accept that there is a soul, then what is the meaning of these attachments to this body? Either way, there's no cause for lamentation. If we are the soul and we never die, then what is the meaning of the attachments of the body? And if you accept that we are one with Krishna, then the separation from each other has no meaning. Right? So in this regard, Krishna explains that you should know that what you're experiencing is simply illusion. So in the same point is being said here by Narad Muni to Yudhishthira. In other words, he's saying that people are thinking that we are the controllers. But really he's saying that no, everything is being controlled by time, which is Krishna. And everybody is under the jaws of the serpent of time. No one can protect oneself, what to speak of protecting others. Now in the next slide is a very small point. Nature's law. The stronger prey on weaker, but not for humans. This is the law of nature. The strong prey on the weak. How a bigger animal. This is explained by so nicely with this verse, how the bigger animals eat the smaller one. The ones without hands will be eaten by the ones with hands. The ones without legs will be eaten by those who are with legs. So this is the law of nature, that the stronger prey on the weak. So there is no reason to lament. Yeah. So I'll read a little bit of the purport here. Yeah. Prabhupada is writing how there's nothing to be lamented if a tiger eats a weaker animal, including a man, because that is the law of the Supreme Lord. But although the law states that a human being must subsist on another human being, there is a law of good sense also. For the human being is meant to obey the laws of the scripture. This is impossible for other animals. So in other words, this is not the law for humans. The human being is meant for self-realization, and for that purpose, he is not to eat anything which is not first offered to the Lord. The Lord accepts from this devotee all kinds of food preparations made of vegetables, fruits, leaves, and grains. Fruits, leaves, milk in different varieties can be offered to the Lord. And after the Lord accepts the foodstuff, the devotee can partake of the prasad, which is by which all suffering in the struggle for material existence will be gradually mitigated. So Narad Muni is saying that how Yudhishthira should break his attachment, do your duty, and towards the spiritual Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he's the only protector. Same thing Bhishma said. Just break, this confusion and do your duty as a king. So in the next slide, we'll talk about how Narad advises to look towards Krishna. He's everywhere. This is a very interesting point that I thought is important. How time, Narad Muni talks about time as being so fearsome, right? How time is unstoppable. Yet Krishna is present not only in time, but he's present as a beautiful form of Krishna, as Shyama Sundar. So he's basically telling Yudhishthir how we should look towards God. He's already everywhere, but we should understand that he has also assumed his eternal form full of bliss, which the Pandavas are looking at anyway, right? So time is the form of the Lord. It's a casual form of the Lord, right? And through this, he's working on the non-devotees, how he's causing everything to happen. And nobody can reject that form of time. Even non-devotees cannot reject that form. It will act, right? Now, and of course, Pandavas have a direct experience, like I said, where Krishna is interacting, and the people of Dwarka also, how he's interacting with all the queens. So in other words, what is Narad Muni trying to say here ultimately? How does he end his explanation, his trying to get Yudhishthira out of the lamentation? Basically, the summary is that he's saying that you can protect to the degree that you can control, because you are also under the control of time. And therefore, you cannot really protect somebody who's else, because you yourself are fallible. So all living, for us, it means that we really cannot really protect anybody, because we are also under the control of time. Therefore, what should we do? We should simply surrender to Krishna and work for his pleasure. Look towards Christ. And that's why it's called look towards, why Narad Muni is saying, look towards the Lord. Don't worry, Dhritarashtra will be taken care of. So in our next slide, which is the last one, Dhritarashtra performs Ashtanga Yoga. This is from verses 52 to 60. He actually does the mechanical system of yoga, by which one has to follow strict regulations, which helps in controlling the mind and diverting it to spirit. It's very austere. Right? So Dhritarashtra did all of the above, because people in those times were all trained. Growing up, even men and women. We hear in the story of the third canto how Devahuti was trained in all systems of yoga, in Ashtanga Yoga. Everybody in royal families, they grew up learning this system. So for Dhritarashtra, it wasn't very difficult. Of course, it's still not easy. To leave family. That is the hardest part. But once he got there, he knew how to control his mind, starting with controlling the asanas and dhyan and so on. So here Prabhupada explains how the process of Ashtanga Yoga, by which one reverses the process of material entanglement. And why do they do this? Is because one is covered by so many coverings, and these things have to be given back, and one has to remain aloof from everything. So this is the process of giving back all these material coverings. So, but Yudhishthira Maharaj, of course, is thinking that, Yudhishthira needs to be taken care of. Right? So in this way, Dhritarashtra gives up his body, and Gandhari, she follows after that. She also, puts herself into the fire, and that's where the story, actually, the chapter ends. So thank you very much, and I'll give it over to Radhika to explain the children's activities from the guidebook.
Yes, thank you. Just a few seconds to set up my technology. And I'm having issues with my camera today, so the view is not great. Okay. Let's share my screen. All right. Okay, Hare Krishna, everyone. Before we delve into the 13th chapter, I wanted to share news from around the world. So here are the three children of Yashoda Nandini, Devi Dasi, and Tota Gopinath Das from England. And they've shared some wonderful pictures. They've been inspired by Mataji's books, and they've been doing the activities. And they've shared some pictures of Tungavidya, she's 6, Gopakumar is 4, and Neela Madhava is 2. So they certainly have their hands full with 3 little ones, but they're very faithfully doing these activities. So this one is the activity of 2 birds in a tree from chapter 2, and you can see how creative they are. Like, look at the birds and look at, eating the fruits, and, the idea of getting fall leaves and using them for the project. So this one is done by the chapter explains, and this is Gopa or Gopakumar. The chapter explains how the soul and the super soul are like 2 birds sitting on a tree, and the soul is always trying to eat the fruits, fruit of activities and joy, and the super soul is just waiting and watching for the bird to turn towards him. He's just so patient and loving. And this is from chapter 5, that Paramahamsas are like swans, and they like to sport in the beautiful waters where there are nice lotuses. And the crow-like mentality is to go to other literatures besides our beautiful Bhagavatam. And then from chapter 11, they did this amazing 3D map of Dwarka. So it's only a video, there isn't any sound, but look at this. They really brought Dwarka to life, and Dwarka has a lot of cows. It looks almost like Vrindavan. But it also has these palaces, you'll see, even birds on trees. Look at the amount of detail. And the children have colored the palaces, and then even their Rajma kidney beans on the side of the road. So they were really inspired by the activity that's given in the book to construct a model of Dwaraka. Look at their Play-Doh fish and ducks and frogs. And I really like the castles and the palaces with their watchtowers. A very green and beautiful Dwaraka. Oops. So I still haven't figured out how to go to the next slide without clicking on a video. So thank you so much for sharing, Yashoda Nandini and Tota Gopinath booth. Viewers, please share with us and inspire us to continue with this series. And let's move on to chapter 13. Dhritarashtra quits home. So just like in every chapter, there's a beautiful story summary provided. Oh, King Yudhishthira called a messenger to the palace one day. Guess who's returned from his pilgrimage? Who? Asked the king hopefully. Is it my dearest Uncle Vidura? I really miss him. The palace just isn't the same without him. Yes, replied the messenger excitedly. I see him coming. So very, very beautifully written. 2.5 page summary that goes through the entire chapter, has some nice coloring sheets for children to color. Goes all the way till Dhritarashtra self-immolating himself. And key messages summarized by verses that are grouped together by theme. And then we move into understanding the story. Multiple choice questions that are always a lot of fun. Who has returned from pilgrimage? A. Dhritarashtra. B. Vidura. C. Balaram. Those kind of questions. And this is more understanding the facts that are given in the chapter. There's a place for this kind of understanding, and then of course we move into higher thinking questions that are more reflective and require an essay answer. So some very thoughtful questions given here. Why did Vidura not inform King Yudhishthira about the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty? So Prabhupada explains that in in the purport. And why did Dhritarashtra leave the palace without informing anyone? Describe the attachments of Dhritarashtra and why is it important to take Vanaprastha? Okay, and then we delve into activities. So Mataji mentioned about food chain, and this is really a great lesson in science. So understanding the food chain. Maharaj Yudhishthira is advised by Narada not to worry about his uncle's suffering for want of food, for they could live on vegetables available in the jungles, Prasad, the Supreme Lord, and thus realize the path of salvation. The laws of nature state that the weak are food for the strong, and the human being is strong because he or she has been given the intelligence to choose how to act, to obey scripture, or to act like the animals. The human is meant to care for animals, not to eat them. He or she should offer vegetarian food to Krishna and eat only prasada. So it encourages children to create a wall chart to illustrate a food web containing some of the types of creatures described in this verse, drawing images and understanding, food chain and food web. And we launched into a whole science unit with this, understanding food webs and food chains, and even photosynthesis, since plants are the primary producers. So a very nice way to launch into science, and also an encouragement to read A Chicken is Food for a Cat by Urmila Mataji. The book provides a resource food web. It shows how energy is passed on from one living entity to the next, so starting from producers. And the grass and flowers get their food energy from the sun, and other living things get their energy from eating other living things. Also a nice discussion of, okay, so if we're vegetarian, does that mean that there's absolutely no ahimsa? How come we're allowed to take the life of certain plants, for sure? And then another activity that has a couple of resources attached to it about character life history of the 4 chaste women that are described in the purport to verses 3 to 4. So you can also research one of the male personalities, it says mentioned in this chapter, and complete an activity sheet for them too. So you can either draw or write. And resource 2 provides some information on these 4 personalities, Kunti, Draupadi, Subhadra, and Gandhari. So some bullet points are provided, wonderful events of their lives. And then for each character, making a character life history, main events, people in her family, qualities, and who she is married to. And of course, if the children are doing this for male characters, they would just modify that. It's the same character life history that can be used for both. And then a chaste lady quiz. So based on the bullet points that are provided, children can go through and memorize or learn those, and then the teacher or parent can conduct a quiz. Also nice place to discuss what is chastity, and it's not just a quality for women, but for all devotees. Analogy activity, Vidura's saintly qualities. Vidura was very kind to Dhritarashtra in telling him that he should leave home and devote the last days of his life to meditating on Krishna. So in a resource, there's a chart of different qualities of saintly Vidura, and in the spaces provided, discuss how he showed these qualities in the particular pastime and how we can practice these qualities in a specific way in our own lives. So here's the list of qualities given and how Vidura showed them, a place for the child to write or draw. And following Vidura's example, how can we practice these qualities? So maybe for younger children, it's more of an oral discussion or illustration, and for older, writing. Biography. Write a biography based on the life of Vidura. A biography is a written account of a series of events that make up a person's life, written in second person. The first task is to research a person's life, and there's some bullet points given to do research, and then go ahead and write the biography. So excellent way to teach English language arts through the Bhagavatam. And remember to add a cover and illustration to make the biography complete. So sorry, write a letter of apology from Dhritarashtra to the Pandavas. Reflect on all the things that Dhritarashtra has done to the Pandavas and their family. And then, composing a letter. This can involve working on punctuation and grammar. So a really nice way of learning English. And then, based on verses 9 to 10, that talks about devotees visit holy places of pilgrimage to feel closer to the Lord and take shelter of advanced souls that are in those places. Research 4 places of pilgrimage of your choice and create a guidebook, like a travel brochure for devotees about these destinations. And again, bullet points are provided regarding what can be included in that guidebook. Historical significance, where is it located, what's the best time to visit, what language is spoken, and how to approach the dham and what not to do. Keywords to learn vocabulary, spellings from the Bhagavatam. So words such as chaste, young, body, look them up in a dictionary and write their definition here. And missing words. So over here, all the words are provided and they fill in the blanks. A word search, and of course answers. And we've not been receiving too many questions about how the books are available, so I think everybody understands they're available via Amazon and through Golden Age Media. Okay, so we are ready to dive into our final section, which is questions. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to check YouTube as well. And then you can unmute and ask your question directly. Any questions? Okay. Adi Gorangi Mataji, thank you. Please go ahead and ask away.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Sandhavat Pranam. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. I had a couple questions, Mataji, about this section. In the verse for 28 in this chapter, it's talking about Dhritarashtra. The first step is he becomes the Dhira. And that says, in the purport, it says that's the preliminary stage before you prep for sannyasi and then eventually get to the Paramahamsa stage. Is that what happened then with Dhritarashtra? Did he achieve that Paramahamsa stage?
Well, he actually received the stage of Dhira, at least, where he became, So I think for him, it was a big step up because he was meant, Prabhupada explains how he was meant to be in hell for what he had done. I mean, what he had done was, try to harass and try to get pure devotees killed. So that was not a small thing. So somebody who was destined for hell has been coming to that stage of Dhira, where he liberated from all material, attachments. So when he left, he was free of all attachments, including his wife. So he did receive that, but that's obviously not enough. One has to be established in pure love of God. So he just achieved the state of Dhira, really, not a Paramahansa.
Okay. And he only achieved that, to my understanding, is because of the association of Vidura.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
And that was Vidura's relief, because he just didn't want him to go to hell. Obviously, he had great affection for him based on 2 levels, being his brother as well as a pure devotee. He felt compassionate towards him. So on both levels, he was feeling relieved at that point. In fact, he was quietly watching, Dhritarashtra burn to ashes, and having been relieved, he didn't go back to the palace. He left again on pilgrimage to get over that whole lamentation period, where, there's some feelings there, for Vidura as well. When a pure devotee is connected to somebody, even though he's free of all material attachments, still Prabhupada writes elsewhere that it's natural for him to feel feelings of affection, and his feelings of lamentation, So Vidura immediately leaves. But he knew that he had at least taken up to that position.
Okay. And Dhritarashtra did he then merge into Brahman, like
It
into
doesn't.
the Brahma Jyoti? Is that what happened? He didn't,
Yeah,
he was doing Astanga yoga, so
yeah,
I assumed he was meditating on Lord
yes,
Krishna.
yeah.
But then where did his soul go to? Like
Well,
he merged.
yeah, it doesn't actually say where he went to.
Okay.
It doesn't really say. Now, in 10th canto of chapter 49, it gives more about Dhritarashtra, how when Akrura went to him, Yudhishthira sent him to see where he's at in terms of has his feelings changed, towards the Pandavas. Not the Yudhishthira, I'm sorry, who sends him? Akrura. Kansa sends him, right? No, Krishna sends him. I'm not sure. Sends Akrura to find out. Then Dhritarashtra, when he tells him that, explains to him and tries to plead with him that you're such a great king, you have such a noble family. I mean, look at the people that he was coming from. I mean, related to, right? How is it you're acting in such a way that's going to degrade you and degrade your whole, your activities and ruin you completely? At that point, it's shown how Prabhupada explains how actually Dhritarashtra was actually a very great soul, and he understood everything about who Krishna is. And he was acting as part of the Leela of Krishna, to
Okay.
regard Krishna with his pastimes. So really, Dhritarashtra, in true sense, he was not what is being depicted here.
Okay.
So we don't know, it's not explained, but definitely there's always two aspects being shown in Bhagavatam. One is the deeper internal aspect, and one is the external, to make a point to all of us. If one is offensive towards devotees, then this is where he can get to. This is the only point that he can reach. Yeah, getting pure love of God is not so easy. So that's the learning we get. But then the deeper reason is that Dhritarashtra actually was already a great devotee of the Lord, and he was assisting Krishna in his pastimes. But it doesn't, it's so he probably went back to Godhead, because he was assisting Krishna in his pastimes.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mataji.
Yeah.
Okay, we have Kalandi Sundari Mataji with us. Please ask away.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Mata, you, as you told that time control everything is like when the rest of thing happen, as time is managing everything. So when Mata in our life anything good or bad happen, that is we depend on time. Like if something happen and like wait for solution of the problem, so we depend on time. As time come, it will be get solved. Something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes calamities come to us, but then if we see it as time in terms of Krishna, giving us for a higher purpose, for a greater reason, and we simply tolerate it for the time being, then gradually Krishna will reveal a greater plan. Will reveal more to us in terms of what we got out of that. Sometimes things that we find so calamitous ends up being very favorable eventually, right? It appears like the whole, everything is falling apart, right? We can't think of anything good from that, right? Because it's just kind of completely ruined our whole, the way we are and the way we think, all that. But then, we have to take solace in the fact that Krishna, with his devotee, he always acts for a deeper reason, right? And we see that in the Bhagavatam again and again. When Vritasura was appeared, and the demigods went running again to Lord Narayan, then Narayan, and to Brahma first, right? Then Brahma said, you just have to wait for this to pass, because it's the Lord's plan, and there's nothing we can do about it. And demigods, because being obedient servants, they immediately accepted. They didn't protest. They were powerful personalities. They could have still tried and try to get rid of him, right? But they didn't, because they understood that we have to wait. We have to wait. When Bali Maharaj conquered the heavenly planets, again, this happened. They understood that it was a plan of the Lord. They had to wait for the demons to become, to become weak again, and they to conquer back all the kingdom. They had to wait, and they had to tolerate everything. Hiranyakashipu, when he, was destroying all the demigods, he became king of Indraloka, right? And he was ruling. All the demigods were in hiding. They were hiding. They lost their homes. Diti, the mother of the demigods, was so, Aditi was so devastated. But they all had to wait for the Lord to unfold his plan. Right? And he came as Nrsimhadev. In the story of Bali Maharaj, he came as Vamandev. So this is how, we can learn from the stories that sometimes we just have to wait. We have to bide our time and let that pass over.
If we think that this is only for happening for great personality, well, what about that?
No, we have to see the Lord's plan even as a small devotee. Because Krishna is, within the heart, Paramatma, and at all times he's guiding every living entity towards him, especially those who have already are looking towards him. He's guiding even the little animals and the lower species of life. He's the only one sitting next to that soul. Who's going to be in a body of a worm except for Krishna? And he's guiding him here. Here is food for you. Go and eat this, right? What to speak of devotees? He's always with the devotees and guiding them towards, going. He also gives them the strength to go past that obstacle. For the devotees, Krishna will never give a test which cannot be overcome by a devotee. He'll never give a test.
And Mata, Paramatma thing, since you're telling, so I read in Bhagavatam, Paramatma is very neutral. So what does this neutral means? Like, if I need to do spiritual progress, then Paramatma help me. And if I do bad thing, then Paramatma help. Something like this, neutral means?
It's the free will aspect. The free will is really very, very amazing. It's a very strange phenomenon where free will, without that free will, we will lose our identity. So Krishna gives that free will. And why he chooses to act in a certain way is up to Krishna. In other words, when he sees our sincere desire to turn towards him, then accordingly, he's not neutral. But he's kind of waiting, but if he sees that, well, we'd rather choose the path away from him, then he becomes neutral. But even that is his mercy, because through our suffering of turning away from him, we will learn. Either way is mercy. If it's neutral, it's still mercy.
And the questions about the kids, like sometimes when kids playing, and in playing mode, something they tell which is not good for spiritual life. And they don't understand that, so we explain and make him understand, and then they understand. They do, for ask forgiveness, different thing. So how serious we take that is that thing, that because kids sometimes play something come out which is not good spiritual, and I catch up, and then I try to manage that, and then they understand and they do what I say, and then they really feel sorry about that, and from heart I understand whatever I say they're doing that. It's not like, and after that they're careful what they're saying, very careful. So how deep we have to go to like this if happen, so how deep we have to go? We, like, as a mother, whatever I can I did, and they also understand, and they doing through, they I tell them, Estelle, if you don't listen, then you go to school. And then that is the big obstacle for them. They want to stick with me, they more than I stick with them. Because I have so many things to do, so many things. So I want to take advantage of that. I want to give as a mother whatever I can. So mother, so if they do in case some mistake, how deep we have to go for,
Well, we have to just simply see it as a mistake, not more. Okay, just like when Madhai went to Lord Nityananda, and he was really repenting. He was already forgiven. He was already forgiven by Nityananda Mahaprabhu. I mean Nityananda Prabhu, because when Lord Chaitanya refused to give him, love of God, and he was very angry with him, he said, "You have to go to Nityananda Prabhu because he's the one you offended." And Nityananda says, "You already, like he already forgave him and gave him pure love of God, right? But still in his heart, he was so regretful." And he says, "I've offended you, I've hit you, I've done this to you." And Nityananda Prabhu said that, "How can I take it seriously? If the child does something to the parent, how seriously is the parent going to take? If he makes it, he's to be forgiven. So your role is to immediately forgive and then to keep instructing him. But you keep instructing him, but obviously because the bond is so strong between the child and the thing, that even though you may be sometimes heavy with him, but yet the child is not going to take it wrong. Why is he coming back running to you? Is because he knows that my mother or father will never, I can trust, and they love me. So you keep doing it again and again, and when you see, and also reprimanding them, you do both. Is that your question? You don't give up. You don't give up on your child where you feel, oh, how you just follow your hunch. Whatever you say. Okay, when you see that there is greater area of improvement in the child, you push a little more. You know when to stop. As a mother, you know how high you can make the bar. Why would you not want to do that? You want the best for him. So keep raising that bar for him. And one day you'll actually see a miracle. When I was parenting my children, I didn't, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm doing. But the results, fairly okay, right? It came much, much later, right? So we don't know the results, what we are doing, but we simply keep doing it because we know this is best for them. Okay. And you'll see it by the way they respond. If they're still running to you, the way they love you, you'll know you're doing okay. Okay.
Thank you, Mata.
I am not seeing any other questions right now. Give a couple more minutes. Anybody else have a question on YouTube or Zoom?
I think we can stop here, Radhika.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We'll hear from you again next week. Hare Krishna.
And we'll be back to our Saturday schedule next week onwards. Thank you for tolerating the change of time, daylight savings time, and change of date. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.